Okay, so I'm joined with Gavin Buckland. He is an author, the official Everton statsman, and you may have heard him on Radio Merseyside, and also he does the Royal Blue podcast. So Gavin, thank you for coming on to GrandOldTeam TV.
Pleasure, thank you. Thanks for asking me.
No problem. I know that you as you were just saying there, technology is a strong point. So I appreciate you using your daughter's laptop to do this interview, mate.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's very kind of you. So last week I did an interview with Jim Koeman, who wrote Everton in the 90s, a book about Everton in the 90s, and obviously you're an author as well, and you've written books on Everton. So let's just start there, shall we? We'll start with the author thing. You wrote a book a few years ago now called Strange But Blue, and that's like I believe all about kind of weird facts on Everton. So my initial question was, what's the kind of the weirdest Everton fact that you've got then?
The weirdest Everton fact? That's a good question, because there's many. I suppose my favourite Everton story is the game at West Brom in 1976, where a dog could legitimately claim the assist for one of West Brom's goals, where he ran onto the pitch and he nicked the ball off Ken McNaught and went to, I think it was Nicky Cross who scored for West Brom. So it was a goal that the dog, and if Opta were around in 1976, he could legitimately have said that the dog was, provided the assist for the goals. I've always liked that story, I've always liked stories with animals on. I think in the book it is a list of all the animals I could find that have been on the pitch during Everton games. But I've always liked weird things like that, and delays for strange things.
Yeah, down the years I seem to recall a few episodes of dogs and cats. The latest one, I think, last year in the FA Cup game, I seem to vaguely recall a cat being on the pitch at some point.
Yeah, there was, yeah. I mean, I think in Swansea in 1952, there was both a cat and a dog on the pitch in the same game, which was I like all stuff with that, strange delays, and I studied every Everton game that there's ever, and most reserve games in that time since we started, and so just to collect in one book really strange games and strange stories surrounding games, and it thankfully it proved, and still is to this day, proved very popular. I'm sure there's maybe a little bit of a market, I think, for a relaunch of it. To be honest with you, I think it's it's 10 years old now. So that's one reprint. I think it can be revised and updated.
Yeah. So what inspired you to put a book together like that then?
Well, I've done a few. I've done a couple on Everton stats, and I've done a quiz book. I think that one is my favourite for the simple reason that I just like strange stories and strange bits of trivia, and little things that are a little bit weird, and you uncover strange things, because I did one within the book where I found a story about Everton had played Leeds Reserves in 1969 at Goodison, and unusually for an afternoon game, midweek game for the reserves, it was played in the afternoon, not the evening. It wasn't like 8 o'clock or 7:30 kickoff, and my mate So what happened was Leeds didn't turn up for the start because they thought it was 7:30, so all the crowd had to leave the ground. And I mentioned it to me mate, and when the story just gets completely out of hand, I said, I found this great story today about when we played a reserve game in the 60s where the opposition didn't turn up. My mate goes, was it Leeds United? And I said, yeah. I said, well, why? I said, well, I've never told you the story about what happened. And I said, no, what happened? He said, he was walking down by the Gladys Street with his mate, and somebody from the club said, do you want to go in the Gladys Street stand and watch the game for nothing? Because we needed somebody to kick the ball back, because it was empty.
Right. If
the ball went in there. So my mate was like probably in his teens at the time, went up there with his mate. And he said exactly what happened. About 10-3, and out of the time, he said, the game can't go ahead, everybody will have to leave the ground. And he said, nice day, so we watched everybody leave, and we thought, we'll have to go. And the club had forgotten about him. They'd locked the double bit of the Gladys Street stand. They'd actually locked. So me mate and his mate were stuck in completely empty ground in the Gladys Street stand. And Let's talk about Everton were playing 2 days later, and he said we thought we stay here for 2 days and watch the game on the Saturday, but in the end they had to shimmy down the pole onto the terraces, and they wandered around the ground for like a few hours trying to find a way out, and everybody had gone home. And then out of nowhere, somebody appeared from the place. Someone said, "Well, it is. We've been stuck in the Gladys Street stand for 3 hours."
It's a good job they turned up then.
A good job turned up, exactly. And they let him out, and the club ended up paying him a couple of quid compensation. But that was a good story, like the best ones. We start off with a little nugget, and then all of a sudden it just opens a completely new story. That's the even better one that you didn't know about. So I put that on a book, and that, apart from the dog story, that's probably me favourite Everton story. That we might be getting locked in the Gladys Street stand.
Yeah. So what was it then? Like that's driven you towards stats then? Because I'll be honest, I think before the days of Opta and stuff, sometimes they can be seen a little bit. I mean, now that Opta do a good job, but sometimes they can be seen as maybe a little bit mundane. So what drew you to that?
I like mundane things, obviously. I know I like football and I like numbers, and it's just so consequently it's just a natural fit. And obviously I like Everton, so but I like all sports statistics and things like that. But merging Everton football stats puts together a few things I'm interested in, and I've been doing stuff for Everton now for about 15 years, and in that time stats, as you say, has changed. You've gone from I don't do performance stats in terms of players, obviously that's done elsewhere, but your normal sequences, hat-tricks, all that type of stuff, and records, I do all that. I'm not a great fan of the way stats are used on players to prove things. It's an interesting new concept, isn't it?
Yeah. So would you say then, Gavin, because this was going to be another question that I was going to ask you, and we'll stick on stats for a little bit. Would you say then that there's, at the moment, in your opinion, too much emphasis put on stats?
On player stats, yeah, definitely. Where such and such is a great winger because he does 2 dribbles a game, or somebody ran 11 kilometres in a game. Yeah, so what?
Yeah, I think. I think a good example of that is actually. I vaguely remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who supports Man United when Tom Cleverley was at Man United, and he was saying about Tom Cleverley's passing stats and how fantastic they were. And I was like, well, Tom Cleverley, as we found out, and this is why he's in the side sometimes, is he does the simple things. He just plays those little passes. So obviously his passing stats look fantastic. He's only doing like 3-yard passes.
Absolutely. I mean, you make them up. I mean, I said to him when we signed this, a guy from Aston Villa, that stat about was only in goal Kante had made more interceptions and dribbles in the Premier League last season.
Yeah.
And I think I said on the Echo podcast, I mean, if I was playing in front of the Aston Villa defence last year, the guys would probably had lots of opportunities to make tackles and interceptions just because the opposition was pressing them so much and creating that many chances. So in volume terms, you're always going to have that opportunity to put them in. There's no better way. The best way is still looking at a player and can he play? And within about 15 minutes, we'll talk about it later, but Adris has shown himself to be, of his debut against Spurs, he showed himself to be, a top class player. I mean, and I think there's also something in the game now where actually players know about the stats a lot more, so they will make a simple pass. If it's if you're going into a challenge which is 40-60 against you, don't go in for the challenge because your tackle stats won't look as great. And there's a theory going around that actually, because with that stats generated and performance is associated with that players, as you say, not necessarily, I'm not talking about Tom Cleverley here, I'm just talking generally, psychologically, you probably may not take on some of the more risky things just in case it goes against you, like stats-wise. And I think that's that's a theory doing the rounds, and it's probably true, to be honest with you, in some cases.
That's really interesting, and I never thought of it like that. I never thought whether or not players would actually hold stats in that much regard. But I suppose, given that fans seem to do to put them on a bit of a pedestal, maybe players do as well. So yeah, that's quite an interesting thing. So just on the stats thing, my automatic question is, how are some of these stats actually produced? So I've got a vision of you, Gav, sitting down to watch a game with a piece of paper, just ticking off how many shots Everton have. and
Yeah.
who's had that shot and whatever, and then tallying them all up at the end. I imagine now there's probably a little bit more to it than that, right?
Yeah, I think my do more now, and it's just basically players' records and historical stuff, and answering questions. Like say in the press box. It's like, so for example, the other week when we played Sunderland, Rom scored a hat-trick in 11 minutes, wasn't it? So all of a sudden, start getting text messages, emails. What's the fastest from people within the media? What's the fastest ever hat-trick? Or all that type of thing. The last hat-trick away from home, or all that type of stuff. So it's that at the game, it's more that reactive piece of me. I missed the first 15 minutes of the second half against Palace because somebody asked me at half time how many free kicks we scored last season, because we scored 3 so far this year, haven't we? And we didn't score a Premier League free kick last year. I think we got 1 in the League Cup. So it's things like that tends to be more in-game stuff. Where you just said something happens on the pitch and you think, I hope somebody is not going to ask me when there's last time that happened. And the thing is as well, when you're giving stats out, well, yourself, when you're involved in websites, so you've got to make sure it's factually correct. That's the fear is, don't ever give something that's where you think there's a risk that it might be wrong just to give a quick answer. You know what I mean? If you don't know the answer, then don't give it, unless you're 100% certain, and that's why I would try to operate over the years. Even though journalism changed so much, isn't it? Years ago, you could a couple of minutes after the game to put in your report or the next day, but now it's instant reaction, isn't it? And so that means there's more pressure on everybody, whether you're a journalist or like you do football statistics. Everything has to be in the now. And there's been lots of times in the press box where you get asked questions and you just disappear, you miss the game then for 15 minutes. Where you're trying to find the answer or something.
Yeah. So when you say that you're the official Everton statistician, then do you are you in charge of providing then lots of statistics to the actual club for them to utilise?
Yeah, it's just in terms of not like the Opta type stuff, but in terms of all the stats around players' records. We built about 8 or 9 years ago, I think, one of the first clubs to have all the results and players' records on the website. So it just provides everything for every game and sort of landmarks, historic moments where anniversaries are coming up, little things that have happened, after games, just bring it to the club's attention. I think Koeman had the best record of any Everton manager after 5 games. That type of stuff. Just so it generates a story and a bit of. It's easier to do when the club's winning, obviously, than when the club's struggling. Because when the club's struggling, obviously, the stats you get tend to be a bit more negative,
Yeah.
But when it's club's winning and scoring goals, it's a lot easier to do.
I see. So the club will actually create content and stories out of your stats.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. And that's newspapers do, don't they? Stuff you'll see in newspapers, and that goes to all people who work with football clubs. The stuff you see in newspapers largely, especially if it's a bit more of an unusual one, will tend to come from club statisticians. Everybody, I think most clubs have got somebody who likes to, look at the historic stats and things like that. So I've got all mine on big database, all the players' records and stuff.
Right, I see. So what was it? I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued to how you got into this. I know you said that you've got a love for maths and whatever, but what was there a moment? When you go into the game as a kid, for example, and kind of doing your own thing then, and then went into it that way? What happened?
And I've always liked sports. I've done sports quizzes and stuff like that. So I always liked sport and facts. I think probably with me, so I did co-authored a book called Everton Facts and Stats in 2001. And as a consequence of that, I got involved with the club and started doing, as I said, stats for them. I had my own programme column for 4 or 5 years called Buckland's Bits and Bobs. And it had my photograph in as well, which probably frightens a few people. And then now I've done loads of stuff for the Everton magazine. I've done bits for the Echo and other other parts of the media. So it is quite busy, and it changes all the time.
Yeah. So just on going back to Opta for a second, because I'm quite interested in how they do their really in-depth stuff. So I've got an app on my phone, which I think it's 442, and when the game's on, whatever, it goes. It shows like literally, obviously, the lines and stuff where how many passes have been completed or whatever. Now, is that generated by a computer, or is that literally generated by people sitting there and inputting that information into a computer?
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? I know there's people who I'll have apps on the phone and go to games, or like when the opposition's got the ball, we'll press the red button, and if the other opposition's got the ball, the blue button, and all that type of stuff. I've not questioned how do you work out the kilometres ran during the game? I would imagine there's some sort, There's nobody out there with the tape measure, is there?
That would be it. That would be cool if there was. Because me and a mate were talking about it at the match of the week, and we were like, I wonder if they got something where they wear a vest underneath their shirts now that tracks this. Because obviously, I know they wear them in training, but do they wear them sometimes under the jersey? Who knows? Who knows?
And for me, who cares? That's the one stat I don't. I don't get it. I don't get it, and I don't want to sound like a dinosaur. And I presume that there are good reasons that people far brighter than me will use it for. But you're on me or you could run 11 kilometres during the game, couldn't we? We might not have the ball. Yeah, we might not. We might run in the wrong way.
No, I know what you mean.
It's just to me, it's just one of them. So a statistic has to have meaning, and when I see that, my first reaction is, so what?
Yeah.
So what?
You're right, because as a supporter, in terms of training staff, I can understand it. You know what I mean? The backroom staff and whatever, they're going to do stuff with that information. They know then who's working hard enough on the pitch or whatever. But for a supporter, as you say, whether or not Morales runs a certain distance or Delafeu does it, do you know what I mean? It's not really. I don't really care too much. But
it's the things you want to say running is when does somebody run? Did he run at the right time? Where did he run? And also, how did he run? Is it a sprint or those are the things. And there's things in football that you just can't quantify, can you? That actually, as a supporter, you want our players, like something like leadership quality.
Yeah.
How would you quantify that? How would you quantify somebody being a leader? How would you quantify somebody who's a centre-half set who's able to organise the defence?
Yeah, you're very right, which is extremely important. But as you say, there's no stats that demonstrate that.
And that's the thing, and I think those are the things as a supporter you want players to do, but they're not quantified. I don't, if somebody makes 20 clearances a game, well, yeah, so what? That's what the job is. And also sometimes that could be because the fullback's not, if it's a centre half, that might not be because they're good. That means that your fullbacks can't cut crosses out.
Yeah.
There's other things going. I think that's what they're struggling with. I think with football stats at the moment is it's not like cricket where it's a 1-to-1 game. Football, there's so many different things that happen in the game dynamically that can influence your performance. That actually, just viewing things in isolation, like how many clearances you made, how many passes you've made or whatever, that could be because somebody else has made a mistake. And also say, if you're a centre half, I always think the ball might not come near me to make a clearance because I've marked somebody properly, so they're not going to pass to him. So how many times you on the game say X marked the centre forward 20 times correctly from a corner, so the ball never went near him. That's the type of thing. That's a far greater measure of somebody's success, say, as a centre half, than how many clearances they made.
I agree. I agree. It is. And there is a hell of a lot of emphasis on it now. You have conversations with other supporters, and they do talk about it a lot. So, it's a strange one. All right, let's move on then for a second from the old stats thing then. So we've spoken about the book that you've written. What about the stuff that you do for the Royal Blue podcast then? What's the deal with that?
Well, the Royal Blue podcast comes from the Liverpool Echo, where it takes its name from the Royal Blue column that goes out of a Saturday. The normal four is myself, Tony Scott, who's pretty well known in these parts, Greg O'Keefe and Phil Kirkbride, who obviously write for the Echo, and it's just really us getting around the table. I think now twice a week, just chewing the fat over all things Everton in a constructive manner, and it's proven quite popular. Yeah. And we've started having special guests on. I think Alan Myers was on this week. It was the former communications chief at Everton. We've had Tony Bellew on a couple of weeks ago, and there'll be other famous Blues coming on, I'm sure, over the next few weeks, former players and so on. And it's just really constructively analysing Everton rather than making it a negative experience. And it goes out, as I say, I think we're doing twice a week from now on, and you can access it via the Echo website and also via SoundCloud and iTunes subscriptions. Which that's all a bit beyond me, that bit, by the way. And that's it. You deserve the right to criticise, but you've got to do it in a constructive manner rather than just generally slagging off people. That's always been sort of my attitude to things. And it works because of the Echo as well. There's obviously a little bit of insight there as well, and it's working well and has proven popular.
Yeah, I think that's a great attitude to have. What you said with regards to criticism, and again, this debate has kind of floated again over the last week or so, especially on the GrandOldTeam forum with regards to the atmosphere at Goodison at the moment. And I was there on Friday night, as you were as well, and last Friday against Palace. And the boos at the end of the game. Now, there was a bit of a debate, were they for the referee, were they for the players? And if they were for the players, what does that say about kind of the mindset of Evertonians at the moment? So, do you feel that at the moment, Gav, with regards, do you think we're a little bit too quick to criticise the players, the manager? Do you know what I mean? Is that
yeah, I know what you're saying. It's a good question, this, and I think there's a couple of comments that I'd make. The first of all, I think anybody who goes to the game deserves the right. I think I appreciate that they've got a right to boo, or when if you think it's poor, if you're paying £50 a ticket or whatever, then I think you're right. Well, they should do. I didn't think that, certainly in the game against Palace, justified booing at the ends of the game. Regarding the mindset, I think generally people are more impatient, aren't they? This is what Alex Ferguson used to say, didn't he, about managers getting sacked all the time. It's the social media generation. It's people want instant success, everything far quicker. So the demands are far greater. And I think that's reflected sometimes in supporters' attitudes generally. And we have made a good start, haven't we, Evan? And maybe that sometimes can work against it a little bit, can't it? If you just have a little bit of a dip, which we have had.
Raises the expectations to the next level,
yeah. And I think that there's a combination of things, both to do particularly with Everton's performance at the moment, but the wider thing of culturally with the way people are at the moment.
So, yeah, with that, Gav, so I brought this up with Jim when I did the chat with him, which is obviously on the channel, which people can watch if they haven't watched it yet. It was a great chat with Jim about his new book. But shameless plug there, by the way. But we were talking about because I was saying when we were sitting there on Friday, I said to my dad, I said I can't remember it being this. Like this, I mean, as the second half wore on and people started to get a little bit more frustrated and Palace started to come into the game, I said to my man, I said, I can't remember it ever being this toxic as it in the 90s when I first started to go and watch Everton, when we were really bad. And I'm just wondering whether or not I kind of, when I think back, I romanticise like that era. But I seem to recall, like a lot more atmosphere in the ground, and that's to do with a whole host of things, about how football is watched now as a spectator sport, I suppose. But I remember a lot more atmosphere, and I remember a lot less kind of toxic booing behaviour going on. Am I right there, or am I just imagining that? Was it the same in the 90s where we, were there boos, and was the atmosphere not as good as it is now?
Yeah, I know you. But I go back to the early 70s, and I remember then it was the cushions and programmes getting thrown out of the top balcony after a bad performance. So
right, so it's not a new thing then.
it's manifested itself in different ways over the years, supporters dissatisfaction, hasn't it? And it was last season, wasn't it? I'd seen under boys, even after you're fifth or sixth in the table, there was booing after some games. And I just think, to me, it's the price people pay for football now, isn't it? That's you were paying. I'm lucky. I go in the press box and so on, so slightly different. But if you're paying, I was comparing it to the week. I remember we got beat 4-0 by Ipswich in 1980, and we were hopeless. And at the end of the game, it was just it was unbelievable, the number of programmes and cushions that were getting thrown from the stands. But then you're paying £2.50 for a stand ticket. Now you're paying sort of 40, 50 quid for a stand ticket. So the stakes are a lot higher, aren't they? You're putting, even allowing for inflation over the years, people are spending a lot more money on football, aren't they? And we know that. And I think with that comes A, more pressure to succeed, but B, people, I think, therefore feel as if more entitled to give their dissatisfaction because I paid 40 or 50 quid to watch that. You know what I mean? Not just talking about just Everton, but in general. I think the money that people pay is comparing to previous periods is one of the biggest factors.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to make. And then on top of that, the fact that now with social media, it's all the time, and that pressure does mount a lot quicker. Because me and my old man was saying, back say before the introduction of social media, you would have you'd think about Everton in the week, but it wasn't 24/7. You didn't have the 24/7 news coverage, and it all. I think maybe it dropped out of your psyche a little bit. Whereas now it's just continuous. So you think about it a lot more. So maybe the pressure built up a lot more throughout the week.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what it does, it empowers people, doesn't it? Social media into communities or whatever, in virtual communities, and what it does is people are far more comfortable probably giving an opinion, perhaps maybe than what they were before social media, etc. Yeah. I think that comes into it a bit more. I feel more entitled to give an opinion, which is good. But at the end of the day, if it's up to generally speaking, if a team's playing well, then that you take that out of the equation. The disappointing thing for me about the Palace game was you yourself, over the last 4 years, they've probably been our most difficult opponents at Goodison. Every game has been, they made it really difficult for us. They've shown a bit of quality. So, a 1-1 draw against them is not, it's not ideal, but it's not the worst result in the world.
No, and actually, good sides. They're very good sides.
You've seen the players they had on the bench there.
Yeah. They brought Johan Kabay on at 70 minutes. You know what I mean? They're 75 minutes. They're not a bad side. Christian Benteke, Zaha, Townsend. Do you know what I mean? They're a good side. I'm with you.
Yeah, and in that context, I thought 1-1 was, let's face it, could have been worse, couldn't it? I thought 1-1 was a fair result, and that's when I thought perhaps maybe the booing bit maybe was not justified, but I appreciate people have got the right to do that. Of course. Because what to say, the Norwich game would be a game, wouldn't it, where you would expect a bit of dissatisfaction, because we weren't great against Norwich in the League Cup or whatever the League Cup calls itself these days, But at the same time, it has been a positive start to the season, hasn't it? This in the context of that. We've got, 14 points from 7 games.
Exactly. So I know what you're saying there in terms of alluding to maybe looking at the bigger picture, and I've mentioned that. So just quickly then, obviously we're coming up to half an hour now, but what have you been impressed with Koeman so far? What are your just initial thoughts on Koeman's start, and where do you think we can go this season?
I think he started as I would expect. As an experienced coach, he's obviously, come in and tried to iron out the flaws that, as supporters, we could say. The goalkeeper naturally needed sorting anyway. The defence needed sorting. Bit more of a defensive shield in the middle of the park. That's reflected in our goals conceded. What is it? It's a 5 after 7 games, which equals our Premier League record. The sort of, I wouldn't say downside to that, but the other side of the coin is obviously that's taken away a bit of our attacking potency, hasn't it? Even compared to last season. So we're having to work hard, aren't we, to win matches? There's something said last week that actually we don't look like a team who can have an off day and scrape a point. We look like a team that needs to win, which I don't know if you remember, Moyes' first season was like that, where we won a hell of a lot of games, 1-0, 2-1, because we had to work really hard. The difference with Koeman, compared to like Martinez, Moyes has got a little bit more money, hasn't he? And so you would hopefully think that the January transfer window, we will be addressing some of the sort of areas that needs improvement, which I think at this moment looks like further up the pitch, doesn't it?
I agree. Definitely need another decent centre forward to cover for Romelu Lukaku, obviously. Given the fact that Kone is Kone and Enner Valencia is on the run from the police. I agree, definitely moving forward. But I like you, I think that we are. But the good thing is we are starting to see them work a lot harder this year. That was one of the main criticisms last year, wasn't it? Probably didn't work hard enough at times. So I think he's drilling that into them, and that's starting to become evident now. So
yeah, I think we've got whether that happens in January, I'm not sure. I'm not saying whether the January market is ideal for constructing a team round. I think you may see a few players added in, but I think it'll be next summer will be the big summer. I think in terms of really taking the club where Mashiri and Koeman and Walsh want us to go. I think January may just be putting a few little bit, plugging a few holes within the squad. I think I wouldn't expect to see anybody being signed for big money, but hey, who knows?
Who knows? It's all exciting stuff. Gav, I've really appreciated speaking to you, mate. Just quickly, just before you go, where can people find you on Twitter? Where can they find you in other places? Within reason, obviously.
Yeah.
Don't go into too much detail.
Yeah. No, Gavin Buckland's one on Twitter. You tend to find that I'll tweet a few the odd Everton stats, especially after a big win. I'm always busy for Saturday nights after a big win, tweeting a few things, So Gavin Buckland's one on Twitter. Thankfully, you don't see my face, which is good.
No, mate, it's all good. Look, I really appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely do this further on down the line this season. Half an hour isn't enough to talk to someone like you, mate. So I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for coming on GrandOldTeam TV.
Pleasure. Thank you.